Good early afternoon. We are live. I'm Andy Andrews. If you are joining us accidentally, I don't know how you could be joining us accidentally. This is Thursday, and we're only broadcasting to Wisdom Harbor. Is it Tuesday? It's Tuesday, isn't it? Wow. I saved 2 days. Ha! I'm 2 days younger than I thought I was. How about that? Well, if you've joined us accidentally, you will know that I'm a nut. I'm kind of a professional nut, but we're glad to have you here. I'm Andy Andrews. This is the Blue Plate Special. And we're broadcasting live from Wisdom Harbor Studios, the official studios of the Orange Beach Lady Makos softball team, the number one team in the country. Yes, there are 24,133 varsity high school fast pitch girls softball teams, and the Orange Beach Lady Makos are number one. Yeah. 27-0 we are, and we have, I say we like I did it too, but the Lady Makos are 27-0 and have right now outscored their opponents 304-26. How about that? I mean, it's just unbelievable. So they're playing a big high school Thursday, which I thought was today, evidently, but they're playing them Thursday up in Birmingham. So let's have a prayer service right now for the Makos. Dave Huco, good afternoon. From 42 and raining in Minnesota. Dave Larder in Phoenix, where it is a Palm Beach Chamber of Commerce, 80 degrees. Yeah, it won't be that long. I mean, because you go from your winters of 60 to your summers of 120. Paul Brannon, greetings from Canada. Still can't decide if it's spring or winter. I talked to a lady from Minot, North Dakota. Or is it South Dakota? It's North Dakota. Is it Thursday? Is it Tuesday? I don't know. North Dakota, South Dakota. They're both alike. I mean, you've never really met anybody from either state. I'm not sure they exist. Have you ever seen anything made in North Dakota, made in South Dakota? Actually, there are. The best and biggest silencer company in the world, Silencer Central, is in South Dakota. So they're making silencers there in a state where you couldn't hear a noise anyway, I guess. Anyway, I talked to a lady from Minot, North Dakota, one time, and I had been there doing a thing in June, and it snowed. And she told me that one time in the middle of July, it froze, and it ruined her garden in the middle of July. And she said that at church that Sunday, she asked their local weatherman, was that an early freeze or a late freeze? Oh, my gosh. Well, one of the things that I really like is disasters. Marcy Crossell Taylor, glad you are doing well this morning. Glad your weather's good. Dana Kilpatrick, you shared. Thank you. Selenia Harris, good morning. Selenia is a fellow author. She's written the best devotional book that I've ever read, The Cowboy Devotional. And Kelly, is that you? Oh, what a surprise. I am so glad. Where is Martis? In the woods, yeah. And what about your granddaughter? She's walking around? She's a great writer too. I mean, I've seen some of the stuff she has written, and that kid can write. Judith DeWitt, good morning. Juanita all day, hello. Bonnie Cates Nix, good morning from Kentucky. Juanita, good morning. Tammy Nance. How you doing, Tammy Nance? How's Big John? How's he doing? And Heather Olson, shared in Utah. You know, Heather, you always share this on Tuesdays, and I really appreciate that. And several of you always share. I appreciate it. Martin Simmons, Ada Floyd, John Mason Smith from Amelia Island, Florida's best kept secret, and of course not anymore. We just told him. Okay, so here's the thing. I like disasters. I like triumphs and I like disasters. And as far as like entertainment, I can be entertained by either, but I just don't want boring. I don't want mediocre. I can be entertained. I want to hear Andrea Bocelli, but I could easily also sit through the guy with a speech impediment who can't carry a tune. I'm fine with either. You know, either entertains me. And so, you know, when I am coaching companies, we have a company called Creating Measurable Results. And when we're coaching companies, one of the things we occasionally do is we detail some disasters, some corporate disasters, because not only are they entertaining, but they teach. I mean, they really teach you what not to do. Even huge companies make massive, massive mistakes, and we saw that this past weekend. How many of you watched the Billy Joel concert on CBS? Did anybody? It was the first, and CBS advertised the dog out of this. I mean, on social media, on broadcast commercials, on billboards, they broadcast this like crazy. Because it was Billy Joel's 100th appearance in Madison Square Garden. Every single one of them have sold out. And it was his very first broadcast television concert. First to be broadcast on live television. And so, obviously, CBS put a lot of money into this and a lot of effort. And who knows how much in marketing and advertising, but it was huge. And then the concert was it was extraordinary. I mean, it was not just built for a live viewing. It was built for us to watch live on television. And it built until, and this was Sunday evening, okay? And this is just past Sunday evening. And so it built until the emotional kicker of the whole night, and he's playing his most famous song, Piano Man. And right in the middle of the song, the screen goes black and the nightly news comes up. Oh my gosh. What a screw up, right? I mean, so obviously on social media, social media went insane. I mean, it wasn't just trending, it was explosive. It was just going nuts. People were out of their minds, you know, to have been carried on this journey for 2 hours and then right in the emotional climax, just, okay, that's it, in the news tonight. I mean, can you imagine? Well, you talk about taking a disaster and making it worse. CBS has done that. I mean, think about it. If you had promised somebody something and you couldn't really deliver, or you had a screw up, something that was out of your hands, or something that you hadn't planned on, I mean, what is the first thing you do? What's the first? You apologize. That's the first thing. I mean, what? That's the first of Mama's rules that we all grew up with, is say, I am so sorry. And then you fix it, right? Well, it's apparently it's Tuesday and not Thursday. And it's just afternoon, and CBS has still, they've done the worst thing they could possibly do, and that is nothing. Silent. Totally silence. And so to all these people on social media, all the people, they have their own network that they could communicate on. They could make their own commercials saying we're sorry. Nothing. Nothing. Silence. Now, here's what I think they should have done. But did they ask me? No. No, they didn't. Nobody up there said, Andy Andrews has a company called Creating Measurable Results, where he helps companies compete in ways their competition doesn't know a game is going on. Andy's helping a lot of companies. Why don't we just call him and ask him what we should do? Actually, they wouldn't even have had to do that, because it seems pretty obvious to me. First of all, get on your knees. Grovel. Tell people how sorry you are. And then fix it. Make it right. On CBS.com and I think Paramount, streaming services that they own, they are already streaming the entire concert. Okay, so why wouldn't you apologize and say, here is a free pass? Because, one person watches it, 20 people watch it. It doesn't cost them any more to stream it. It doesn't cost any more. And so why wouldn't you say, I'm sorry, and, we know this doesn't make up for that moment, but we want you to have the whole concert, and so here it is. And so number one thing that would do is it would calm people down. It would let somebody know you actually cared or paying attention or whatever. But it would also bring new people into your streaming service where you could kind of see what's going on, and you would bring, they could have turned a disaster into kind of a win, but no. They just didn't want to have those memories. Okay. All right, that's my rant about CBS. We could rant about all the national media, I guess. It's obvious they don't care about us. So, all right. Today, I wanted to talk about books. I've been thinking about books a lot. And then here, Kelly, you come and you're down here at the beach with your granddaughter who's writing. And a lot of people obviously ask me about writing. And one of the things there's a couple of things that people ask. One is people say, hey, I am really wanting to write a book. And I'll say, okay, well, are you going on it? And they'll say, oh, not really. Really? How long have you been wanting to write a book? Oh, 5 years, 10 years. Well, you got to actually write. You got to actually write. And people say, and I'll say that. I'll say, well, you actually have to write to get a book. And people say, well, I'm really waiting until I'm inspired to do it, waiting to, for the right inspiration, waiting for the right mood. And I'm like, I've written, I think it's 26 books now, and I have been inspired probably 26 times. It's when I think of the idea. But the rest of it's work. I'll promise you, when I'm working on a book and I'm getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm not jumping out of bed going, I am inspired. I am making myself get up. And when I'm sitting in front of a computer, there's only 20 things I can think of I'd rather be doing. People say, you must love to write. No, I love having written. I love being an author. I like signing books for people. I like making my living that way. I love giving books away. But do I like to write? No. I like having written. I like being through with it. I like talking about books. My sister's here, and Jen Andrews is here. Christy, well, you used to be Christy Andrews, and Jen Andrews is not related to us, but you're both showing up here at the same time, and I'm glad you're here. So I'm just ranting about this writing thing. And the other thing that people say to me is they'll say, well, I don't really know how to get started. I don't really know how to write a book. And my answer to that is, yeah, neither did John Grisham before he wrote one. No, I mean, nobody knows how to write a book before they write a book. And but I'm always curious as to how people get started, because what I did is I wrote down a list of things, books that I liked, and I had me a list of books that I liked, and I thought, why do I like those books? What is there about those books that I really like? And I thought, well, they get to something quickly. I'm not reading something to try to figure out, and they get to something quickly, and there's a mystery and it starts in the middle of a scene. It starts in the middle of something. There's something happening. Now I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's happening? But it's something actually going on. If I'm remembering this correctly, Traveler's Gift starts with David Ponder on his knees in his front yard and looking at his house while a cab drives away, and then he throws up. And so you're wondering, what the heck is going on? But then you find out he's just been fired after years and years at the same job, and his life's starting to fall apart. And so I wrote that down. I like things that start off real quickly. I also wrote down, I like books that have an ending to them. And the way that, I would talk to Polly, my wife, about it as I was starting this process. And I realized the way we talked about it is we said, I like a Carol Burnett ending, not a Saturday Night Live ending. And what that meant to me was, if you remember the sketches that Carol Burnett would do, they would end with the biggest laugh. It would be the biggest joke, the biggest laugh, the punchline, and everybody'd go crazy and clap. And then Saturday Night Live came along, and who knew where their biggest laugh was going to be? I mean, maybe, and sometimes they wouldn't really get one, but a lot of times it would be in the middle or right when somebody came out and you realized who they were. But at the end of the sketch, a lot of times the applause sign would just come on and everybody would applaud and they'd walk off the set. And we've all read books like that, right? Where you get to the end of it, you go, was that it? We started talking about the way I refer to an ending of a book that I really want, or that I want to create, is I want to create a Hitler's head. Now, the reason that I call a great ending a Hitler's head is because and this was, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, I read a book, and it was a bad guy, good guy thing, and it was all over the world. I mean, this good guy was chasing this bad guy, and I mean, the book is like, it was like this thick. I mean, the book was thick. It was a big book, and you didn't really know what the bad guy had done. You just knew that several countries were after him, but the good guy was the one that was closest to him and came really close a couple of times, and being, in Paris, and then in Rome, and then in Brazil. And so finally, after the book, which was like this thick, it gets down to the end of the book, and they're in Switzerland, and the guy has gone into an ice vault, and he's the bad guy, and he's come out with something And on this ice slope, the good guy and the bad guy get into a shootout, and the good guy finally plugs him, and the bad guy slides down this ice fall with a streak of blood, and he's got this bag that he's holding on to, and he finally hits this hump of snow, and it jerks him to a stop, and he's dead. And out of the bag, as his hand goes open, out of the bag that he has gotten from this vault, out of this bag rolls the frozen head of Adolf Hitler. And you find out that they had kept Hitler's head in this vault until cloning could be achieved. And now that cloning had been achieved, the Nazis sent somebody to retrieve Hitler's head, and this guy stopped it. But you didn't know until like 4 paragraphs to the end of the book, and the book was this big. And so it's one of those books that you get to the end, you go, dang! And so that's why I always said I always wanted to end my books with a Hitler's head. That's my code word for it. So I thought I would, one of the things, if you're wanting to write, the one thing you've got to do is read. I have never met even a good writer who didn't read a lot. It shapes your words, it shapes your thoughts, it shapes how you communicate what you're doing. And so I thought, excluding any spiritual books and excluding any how-to kind of books, or even excluding biographies, I thought I would give you what are currently my 5 favorite books, and then I would and I'll tell you why, and then I thought I would go over 10 authors that I think you ought to read. Not that you asked, but people ask all the time, and so here we go. The first book on my list does not vary. Some of the others vary, but this first book on my list, my favorite book of all time, has not changed for 12 or 14 years since I found it. And the name of the book is The Old Man and the Boy. It's by Robert Ruark. Robert, R-U-A-R-K. And the book was written before I was born. I was born in 59. The book was written in 56. And so this book is set in the 1920s, before the Depression, and it's set on the North Carolina coastal plain, that area. And you never really kind of hear much about the boy's parents, and you just kind of get the idea something's gone on with them, or they're bad problems or something. But the boy's being raised by his grandparents. And so the granddad is the old man, and the boy is telling the story as an adult now. And so I was at the hunting camp, Trey Baird, right? I was sitting there in the dining room and asked Trey, I said, hey, Trey, what? I said, you ain't got to say my books, and you can't say the Bible, but what's your favorite book you've ever read? And he said, The Old Man and the Boy. I said, so, no, who's that by? And he said, Robert Ruark. I said, I hadn't heard of that book. He said, yeah, my daddy gave it to me when I was 10 years old. I've read it at least a dozen times. And, Trey is a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon. And I was like, really? How have I not heard of that? And Robert Ruark, he said, yeah, Robert Ruark used to write all these hunting articles and all. And so the stories are about his granddad taking him hunting, taking him fishing, taking him to, old African-American churches, taking him to oyster bakes and catching turtles and the lessons that went along with that, teaching character and so then I said, wow, I'm going to have to get that. And later that night, I asked Sandy Stimson, I said, have you ever heard of a book called The Old Man and the Boy? He said, oh, yeah, it's one of my favorite books of all time. Like, wow. And I asked Joe Bullard, I said, you ever heard of The Old Man and the Boy? He said, I love it. I've read it 5 times. I'm like, where have I been that I have not read this book? So I ordered it, and I was halfway through the first chapter, and I knew this book is one of the best books I've ever read. And at the end of the book, I was like, this is the best book. This is my favorite book I've ever read. I've read it 5 times since. And I read one night as I was going through it, the first time, I read the first chapter to Austin, Adam, and Polly. And Austin's comment was, he said, that book, that first chapter should be read at every hunting camp in America the night before opening day every year. And so I've since turned a lot of people onto that book, and I don't know anybody who hadn't, Beaver Applin, the guy who owns Buc-ee's, Beaver told me not too long ago, he said, that is just the greatest book ever. Dave Ramsey said, thank you so much for turning me onto that book. And so anyway, The Old Man and the Boy. It's awesome. Okay, here's number 2 on my list. And this is these top 5, 3 of them kind of stay in that top 5. I kind of rotate out a couple of 3, but number 2 would be Forrest Gump. Not the movie, the book. If you liked the movie, you'll freak out over the book. And I found the book like 10 years before the movie ever came out. I was in an airport, and I saw a paperback that had kind of a goofy looking cartoonish face on it, and Forrest Gump. I had not even heard of Winston Groom at that time. But I looked, and there was a blurb from somebody, I can't even remember who it was, but they said, this is the funniest book I've ever read in my life. So I picked it up, and while it's in my top 5, it is the funniest book I've ever read in my life. I mean, I laughed out loud so many times reading this book, and I've read Forrest Gump 5 times. And really, it's odd that it was about the 3rd time I read it that I really kind of understood just what kind of genius Winston Groom was. Because, Winston just passed away a couple or 3 years ago. He lived right over here in Fairhope. And so I would see Winston every now and then. But after I read that book like the 3rd time, I was a little bit in awe of Winston, because Forrest Gump is written in first person, meaning it's Forrest telling the story, okay? And he's obviously mentally deficient, okay? But as he tells the story, you become aware that he is aware he is mentally deficient, and he comments on it and explains things in his odd way, and also explains why he sees it that way. It's a genius book, and to be a genius book and be the funniest book I've ever read in my life, and I still think that after reading it 5 times. So I would really urge you, get Forrest Gump and read it. Had a friend, the first time I read that book, I had a friend who was in high school. He was 11 years younger than me, and was a senior in high school, and he didn't read very much. And I gave Brad Rollins that book, and his mom, Kathy and Dick Rollins, told me later that they would hear Brad. They would be trying to go to sleep and would hear Brad in his bedroom laughing hysterically by himself. And they just thought, wow. But that's the response that I get from people who read Forrest Gump. Okay, here's number 3. And this one I feel very close to right now because the author was just here. Michael Perry is the author, and the book is Population 485. I found this book by accident. I was in a bookstore in Wisconsin and got drugged down into a basement because a tornado was coming, and I'd grabbed a book off the shelf just because I didn't want to be bored. And I didn't read the book for months, but when I read it, I was blown away. Michael Perry is a first responder, and the book is the subtitle. The book is Population 485: Meeting Your Neighbors One Siren at a Time. It's a little town, New Auburn, Wisconsin, and you know, it's an unusual writer that can make you laugh, make you really think deeply, and make you tear up in the same book. And I mean, the book, I don't really know how to describe Population 485, except that I've just read it for the second time. I remembered how much I loved the book, and then after getting to know Michael, and Michael came into Orange Beach for a few days, and you can look back. I think he was last week's podcast. But I thought, when he left, I thought, I'm grabbing that book. And by the way, if you're in the studio, Michael Perry's books are on this top shelf right here. We have some of them on this top shelf. And so Population 485, I read it again and was more blown away than I was when I read it the first time. He has a very unusual gift. Somebody that can be that funny and yet think that deeply, you just don't see it very often, or at least I don't. But Michael Perry, Population 485. Don Reed. You might recognize that name because Don was the lead singer of the Statler Brothers. And Don has written several books since the Statlers retired. But he wrote one called Piano Days that I think is a masterpiece. I've liked everything that Don has done, but Piano Days it's a masterpiece. I mean, it's just one of the top 5 books. It's one of my top 5 books, and if you liked that show, The Wonder Years, you'd love Piano Days because it's about growing up in kind of a small town America, and just it's almost like watching the Andy Griffith Show when it didn't really matter who was on. It didn't matter if Barney was missing from the episode, or even if Andy was gone, or if they never showed Otis or Floyd, because the town was the star. It was the town. It was that feeling that you got about the town. And I think that's the same way it is with Piano Days. But Don Reed, I mean, this guy's obviously, he's in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame and the Country Music Hall of Fame because he wrote 90% of the songs that the Statlers sang. You know, he's the guy who wrote Class of 57. He wrote Whatever Happened to Randolph Scott. There's so many. He wrote Bed of Roses. So many songs that he wrote, and you got to be a genius to write more than a couple of hit songs that tell stories. And so then you're like a double genius if you can translate that to a book. And he has. So Piano Days by Don Reed. Cannot recommend that one highly enough. And then the last of my 5, this might kind of play on and off my list, but I was blown away by this book. It's a detailed account of D-Day and what's happening there. It's called The Guns at Last Light, and it's by Rick Atkinson. And that book is one of a trilogy, and of all things, 2 of the 3 books won the Pulitzer Prize. It is the definitive book on D-Day to me. So, now I know we're running out of time. Let me give you one more great book, and this is a kind of a wild card book, but Sandy Stimson called me not too long ago, and he said, "Hey, I've got a drive coming up. Give me a book I had never heard of that you really like." And I said, Elephant Company by Vicky Constantine Croak. Elephant Company. It's one of the most unusual books, one of the best stories, true story, that I've ever heard of in my life. I listened to that on Audible, and it is about World War II and when they were using elephants over in Burma. And the Japanese were stealing elephants, and the British were using elephants, and they had been using them in the teak industry, and it tells the story of an escape and about a particular elephant. But that book is fascinating. Sandy said he got into a driveway and sat there for 45 minutes to listen to the rest of the book. He was so blown away by it. But Elephant Company, Vicky Constantine Croak. Okay, so let me list some authors for you. And a couple of them I've already mentioned. Winston Groom, you can be sure on anything Winston Groom wrote. And he wrote a ton of history. There's a lot of history that he did. There's a trilogy, and it's The Generals, The Flyers, and the something else. But you'll know the trilogy when you see it. Maybe it's The Leaders. But these are stories, or these are books done about World War II, and just unbelievable. I mean, it's the best I've ever read on Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, and then the Flyers were Doolittle, Lindbergh, and somebody else I can't remember, and then the generals, Eisenhower and Montgomery and Patton, and it's details on these. And so, but those are just brilliant books that Winston wrote. Michael Perry. You guys in the studio need to go look over here when we get through. But I know that Truck is on there. Truck, A Love Story. That was a New York Times bestseller. Coop. I think Coop is like a favorite of mine, right up there with Population 485. Coop is, you'll see, I can't remember exactly the subtitle on that, but it's something like about parenting, raising chickens, raising children and pigs or something. But it is a funny, very deep book. But anything Michael Perry wrote, he's got a book called 40 Acres Deep right now that's a very serious, more of a dark book, just about the farming community and what has happened there and some of the emotional toll that has taken. But Michael Perry, whatever you can find of Michael Perry's, it's great. Rick Atkinson, that's the guy I told you about that won 2 Pulitzers out of 3 books that he wrote, but he's written a bunch more. But these are, as much as I have read about World War II, and it's been a ton, I learned a lot of stuff that I did not know from these Rick Atkinson books. So Bernard Cornwell. Bernard Cornwell is a guy that I read to learn how to tell a story. He writes historical fiction, and Bernard Cornwell was an executive with the BBC in England, and a lady from America was over there on some kind of junket, and they fell in love and decided to get married, and because she had parents living on Cape Cod who needed care, he said, "Okay, I'll move back with you, move to America." And so this was in late 70s, early 80s. And when he got to America, he realized he couldn't get a green card. So he couldn't work in television. And he said, "That's okay. I've always wanted to write anyway." So he wrote his first novel, and he's written probably 60 or 70 novels since. And they're great. They're historical fiction. So there's some from the Civil War, some from the Napoleonic Wars, some from the American Revolution. Probably his most famous ones are the ones that are from the Middle Age. The Last Kingdom series, which BBC has done a series now on the Last Kingdom. Uhtred from Bebbanburg is that character. And then the Arthur series is also incredible, about King Arthur and that whole thing. So Bernard Cornwell. Archer Mayer. Archer Mayer is a guy who lives in Vermont, and he is the state medical examiner. And he has written 30-something books, one a year for years, and they're all good. And they're all about the same character who is a detective who is dating a medical examiner. And so they solve these crimes, and they're really smart books. That's Archer Mayer. Mark Greaney, Greaney, used to write for Who's Hunt for Red October? Why can't I think of the guy's name? Hunt for Red October, Kremlin Conspiracy.
Tom Clancy?
Yeah, Tom Clancy. Mark Greaney used to write for Tom Clancy. And then he kind of broke away, started doing his own thing, and now has had amazing success with a series called The Gray Man. And it's a shoot 'em up. It's a kind of a spy book, an ex-CIA guy that nobody can get, and they call him the Gray Man. And Austin loves those books too. We eat them up as soon as they come out. Harrison Scott Key. Harrison Scott Key has written one of the funniest books I've ever read, with The World's Largest Man. We had Harrison on the podcast, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago, maybe. And he's a nut. He's a great guy. And he wrote The World's Largest Man, which is One of the top 5 funniest books I've ever read in my life. So there you go, Harrison Scott Key. Zane Grey. Now, the Zane Grey cowboy books are good, but they're kind of, to me, they're a little bit dated. The language is dated. You can't help it. They're 100 years old, okay? But I found on Audible 6 or 7 Zane Grey books that I fell in love with, and they are his nonfiction books about fishing. He was a famous fisherman. He had made a ton of money with the books and ended up buying a 190-foot mothership with 2 fishing boats that would go on it. And he traveled around the world fishing places nobody had ever fished before. And he's the first guy to catch a 1,000-pound marlin, first guy to catch a big bluefin tuna, and he's fishing up in the Gulf of Mexico for tarpon and all over the world. And it's fascinating. The language is kind of odd, just the way they talked back then, I guess. But the stories and the things that he's explained are great. 2 more. James Lee Burke. James Lee Burke is from Louisiana. I don't know if he still lives there or not. He's still alive. He's written a series of books. They're Dave Robichaux mysteries. Dave Robichaux is a sheriff's detective. He's a sheriff's detective, and in southern Louisiana. And these books are adult books just because they're just adult themed. There's cussing in some of these books, but this one, James Lee Burke writes, these are kind of dark books, but the stories and I think I like to read James Lee Burke for how he writes. I think I've learned a lot about how to write from James Lee Burke. Now, I'm not talking about the dark edges or the subject matter. I'm just talking about how the guy strings words together. It's pretty brilliant. You can read that. You can smell the swamp. So, James Lee Burke. Now, here's one that I love this guy, Peter Granger. We had him on the podcast, and this is this little old guy in England, and I just happened upon one of his books on Audible and freaked out. Just loved it. Is Peter Granger, Grainger, and so he's got it's a police series, okay, but these aren't dark, some of the, like, there's some authors I don't read anymore because they just got too, I don't need to know how somebody gets cut up or whatever, I don't need to go into the mind of the killer, okay, show me the crime and let's solve it. Let's be smart. And that's what Peter Granger does. And there's an old detective, D.C. Smith, Detective Constable Smith, and he kind of mentors some of these younger ones. And the books, there's a D.C. Smith series, there's a King's Road series. But the thing that I cannot figure out for the life of me, because I've played some of them for Polly, and And I said, you would love these books. But she doesn't like to listen to them. She wants to read them. And they're not in print. They're only on Audible and on Kindle. So you can get them on Kindle, you can get them on Audible, but you can't get them in print. And I like to hold the thing. But anyway, Peter Granger. And so some of those guys, I mentioned them as we went through it, we've got podcast interviews with, so you can see them and listen to them and hear about them if you want to. So there's our show for today. And it's Tuesday. Amazing that I would finally acquiesce and figure that out. But thank you guys for joining us. We will not be here Thursday. Matt and I will be traveling, and we're going to go be filming for Wisdom Harbor. We're going to be up in Nashville with Jimmy Yeary, with Gordon Moat. We're going to see Bill Gaither. We're going to see Dave Ramsey. We're going to see Henry Cloud. We're going to see, I started to say Willie Robertson, but that's in 2 weeks. That's not this trip. But we're going to see a lot of people while we're up there, but not going to be here Thursday. So watch something on Wisdom Harbor. Have a good time. We'll see you soon. Bye.